Oh, right. We are live. The World Economic Forum is currently hosting their annual Davos meeting. There, they are talking about their plans to control the entire economy, the global economy, and society by extension. And we have some crazy stuff to talk about in that meeting. I'm telling you, stay tuned for that because we've got some crazy stuff from this Davos meeting. And also another tragic school shooting. And I ask, what is going on here? We're going to be talking about all of that and more on episode 347 of the In the Tank podcast. All right, welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. And for the first time in a while, we are without Jim Lakely. Jim has come down with a case of the Wuhan flu, but it's probably like the 12th variant by now, so I'm sure he'll be fine and rejoining the show next week. But we do have, however, Chris Talgo, senior editor at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, good sir?
Doing good, and I want to wish Jim a speedy recovery.
That's right. Oh, looks like Jim is joining us. I see his comments.
He's here in spirit.
Have a good show without me. So surely his Jim rants will be via text, and he'll be typing as quickly as possible to keep up with the conversation.
All caps, of course.
And also joining us, filling in that 50 and over demographic left vacant by Jim, Sam Karnick, publications director at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, good sir?
Doing good, Donald. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So I always start off the show by saying for the audio-only listeners that are probably catching the show on a Friday, join us a day earlier on Thursdays live at noon Central Time. We'll be streaming on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and Twitter. You can join the conversation. You can leave your comments. You can leave your questions. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions live on the show. And also, because YouTube has threatened to nuke our channel based on the things that we say, we have created a separate channel just for this podcast, In the Tank podcast channel on YouTube, that if there's a topic that we're going to cover that we think might, have the censors of YouTube rain down on us, we'll exclusively host it on that separate channel. So it's an effort to make sure that we don't self-censor ourselves, so help protect our free speech. Never miss an episode by subscribing to that channel over there. And then one more thing, considering the topic matter that we're going to be discussing at the top end of this podcast, I do want to remind everyone that the views put forth on this episode are solely the views of the person saying them on the podcast and don't necessarily reflect the views and positions of the Heartland Institute as a whole. So if you have a complaint about something that one of us says, take it up with that person. All right. So with that out of the way, I do want to reiterate that I want to dedicate the majority of this podcast to the Davos conference. I think that the attention that's paid to that conference, the annual conference Davos thing, is lackluster, and I think that we can kind of shine a brighter light on that. But before we get into any of that, like most weeks, we seem to always have some breaking news that happens that we have to address on the podcast. And this week, unfortunately, the news broke on Tuesday of yet another tragic school shooting. So everyone knows the details of this already. We're already a couple of days past it, so I don't think there's any need for me to go over the specifics or anything like that. But I do think that we should talk about it. And I don't want to have the typical conversation about, that like kind of comes up whenever this sort of thing happens, whether it's the mainstream media or your average podcast, social media conversations, or even conversations amongst friends. The same conversation seemingly happens over and over again. One side says we have to do something, and the other side counters with reasons why that something is actually going to be ineffective and maybe even counterproductive. Then the one side says, hey, you're taking money from the NRA. And the other side says, no, you're just trying to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. And this is the pattern. And I've seen it play out over and over again. And I was on a group text where this exact thing was playing out. Maybe not the accusations of taking money from the NRA, but that same thing was playing out via text. And frankly, I'm sick of it. Like, I just can't go through this routine again and again and again. So instead, what I'm proposing today is to have a conversation more along the lines of what's going on. That's the conversation I want to start off with. I think we all understand that there's sick and twisted people out there that are going to cause harm to people regardless of what laws are on the books. But it seems like these events are happening more frequently. So I want to talk about that. Not necessarily from a public policy perspective first. So what do you guys think? You want to have that conversation?
Well, yeah. First of all, it's not that it seems that they're occurring more frequently. They are occurring much more frequently. I was in high school during the Columbine shooting, and that was, I guess that was like the beginning of this whole thing. But it's just gotten worse and worse and worse as the years have gone by. And I know we're gonna talk about this for the next couple of minutes, but the first question that comes to mind is, why is society producing these kids that are doing this? And we've seen two 18-year-olds in the past 10 days go and just shoot and kill as many people as they could for no reason whatsoever. It's just so disturbing. And obviously this is not a gun control issue. It is a societal sickness issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's the conversation that I want to have. And usually for these podcasts, I have a whole list of notes. You see me looking over to the side because I've got little bullet points of things that I want to make sure that I cover as I'm doing the intros and setting up topics and all of that. And I had my bullet points and everything kind of setting up this conversation, but now I've just got a blank space here because I don't have any notes for this conversation. I just want this to be a freewheeling thing. Whatever direction it takes us in, that's what I want to do for the next, 15 minutes before we start talking about Davos and all of that. But Sam, I admittedly, I did reach out to you because in Jim's absence, we needed another person on. But I thought, Sam's the perfect person to have on this because, you talk about these topics that we talk about at Heartland from a cultural perspective all the time. So I thought you would be a perfect fit for this conversation. So what are your initial thoughts just right off the bat?
Each of these cases is horribly tragic for the families involved, and they're atrocities. It's simply what they are. And you can't make policy that is going to stop people from being the great variety of human beings that they are. The population of this country is some 330 million people now. So pretty much, and because we have more power as individuals, we have more power to influence one another through the internet and social media. We have more power to kill one another with our cars and our and guns and the like, or knives, whatever it is. People are very powerful nowadays. So everything happens, and everything's going to happen. That means that in a world like that, there aren't going to be easy answers for anything. And the biggest way the best way I think you can approach anything of this magnitude is as a cultural issue, by identifying what it is about us that is creating more of these items. Now, we have a lot of school shootings now, but we've always had these kinds of shootings. These mass shootings have occurred ever since we had guns. And of course, there were massacres in the United States before we even were a country. Native Americans would massacre settlers, and settlers would massacre Native Americans. So there are a variety of things that have always been happening, and they become magnified, though, in two ways. One is that the media now are very attuned to getting a quick national and international coverage of anything untoward that happens, anything horrible that happens. They've immediately got a lot of coverage for it. It used to be you'd have to read about it in the newspaper the next day or 2 days later. So that is a big difference, and you can see it visually. So the perpetrator of such an event is going to become a star. They will be a villain, but they will be a star. So we have that kind of incentive that we're creating.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is actually, that concept right there of like, these people trying to make a name for themselves. That was like a topic of discussion for a while, especially, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. It seems like it's less likely now because there's so many of these people. I can't even keep all of the mass killers' names in order. But I think that's like magnified by, the social media. And I don't want to come off as some like, curmudgeon guy. Oh, it's social media's fault. It's video games' fault that's causing all these mass killings or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. But I do think that with social media, there's been this tendency for people to develop like a brand for themselves. They need to be their own, their own influencer, and they're trying to get as many followers as possible type of thing. And I think it's just like a breeding ground for this like magnification of people's like ego and stuff. And also, and Chris, I'll bring you into this conversation because I know that you and I have talked about just kind of like the false reality that social media presents for all of these people, whether it's people, putting up posts talking about how good their life is when in reality it's not that great or something like that, or just the fact that like social media conversations are not an adequate alternative to real life conversations with people. But all of that just has creates this very distorted worldview for like all, for everybody that spends an exorbitant amount of time on social media, and then made even worse during the COVID lockdowns where everyone was stuck in their home and could only interact with people via social media. But Chris, I mean, again, we've talked about this, you want to elaborate on some of that?
Yes. So I think you're, really onto like the greater point here. And I think that social media and just technology in general has disconnected an entire generation. And what I mean from that is they are not interacting with, their peers and with, adults on an everyday basis anymore. They are, solitary. They are looking at a screen. They're going down all sorts of rabbit holes, on the internet and on social media and the like. And I think it's just creating this like alternative reality that they are, just overcome by. I was a teacher for many years, and I saw just how different, this generation of kids interacts with each other and with adults compared to when I was a kid. They are so afraid to just interact in person and just have normal conversations because they're so used to living behind a screen. And I also think that over the past 2 years with the pandemic and with the school closures and with the kids just being locked at home for just months and months and months on end, we've seen depression skyrocket. We've seen depression medication use among teenagers just absolutely skyrocket. And I'm just worried that this is going to have long-term effects that we are just on the brink of coming to grips with here. We've got a generation that we have raised that do not have the spiritual, like guidance that prior generations of Americans have had. And I think that is coming to fruition before us, where they just lack the moral capacity that my parents instilled in me. And that's just a whole nother issue of the broken family. And obviously this kid had a very difficult home life, and it's not an excuse at all. But I think the breakdown of the family and just some of the societal sicknesses that have been festering for decades are responsible for this. And there is no policy solution for this. This is something that, individual communities and families need to solve on their own.
Yeah, Sam, I want to bring you in on that, the idea of like kind of the erosion of like the stable family unit and all of that. And on top of that, Chris also kind of brought up that idea of like a spiritual, like morality type of thing. And that's something that like I have seen, not even just related to all the school shooting stuff, but just like in general, just younger generations, just like this pervasive like nihilism where nothing in the world matters. So why don't we all just burn it down type of thing? Can you speak to some of those points?
We have two major forces working against human thriving in our society, and that are sending people down wrong paths. Chris mentioned that you can go down a rabbit hole in the internet. I think you go down rabbit holes in life, and one of the things that's really important here is that the destruction of the family is not just something that happened. The government, in trying to support the family, has in fact undermined it and destroyed it. So first, the black family has been destroyed, such that families are not even formed in the first place. The marriage rate and illegitimacy rate among Black Americans are just through the roof, and they are increasing among the rest of this population as well. Now, what occurred with blacks. We know very well that this was really pushed by government, by the welfare state. So when you take away the need for two-parent family, you don't get that many two-parent families. But a two-parent family, although it's not essential for the future happiness of the children, it's better en masse than the one-parent family. So if you have more one-parent families in a society, you're going to have more of the things that occur when you have one-parent families. The other important element here, though, is that the schools do not teach a traditional American, frankly, Christian morality. Now, they have decided that that's unconstitutional. That's false, but that may have been an honest thought on their part. It may have been that they've deduced that that's the case. However, what they've substituted, social emotional learning, is in fact a very, very damaging concept. What it does is it turns teachers away from being people who equip children with what they need to know and be able to do. So know history, do math,
Right.
Be able to read well. It turns them away from that and makes them concentrate on being therapists and moral trainers. And this is done from a completely secular, worldly, materialist perspective. And you brought up the word materialism. Well, that is exactly what has happened. So what we've done is, perhaps with the best of intentions, we have traded the traditional Christian morality for an experimental morality, which parents didn't know was happening.
Right.
And now, since COVID, they have discovered it. They're appalled by it, and they want change. So I think we may actually be at a tipping point where things can finally get better. But
Yeah.
it all depends on how policy people react.
Yeah, I think like, with all the institutions, whether it's the education system and the media and all of that, they've just been really like pushing this, this idea that, America is like fatally flawed. And there's so much terrible going on in the United States that it's just like, it's, we saw it during the riots of a couple of years ago, just burn it all down type of a thing. And I told this story to Chris, about a year ago. There was a bad storm in our neighborhood. A lot of tree branches knocked down, that type of thing. And my wife and I took our son for a walk. We're just going to see, all the aftermath of it. And we walked past this house, and there was a family out there. It was like a dad and a mom, and then their kids. And they were cleaning up all of the sticks in the yard. And one of the kids was like a 14, 15-year-old girl, picking up sticks and put them in the bag. And I just thought about that. It caught my attention because it's like, in this day and age, a 14, 15-year-old girl, the last thing they want to do is help their parents do chores or something. And I just thought, like, it clicked in my head. It's just like, she must realize that she has a little bit of a responsibility over her household and a pride in keeping her household, as tidy as possible. And I just thought like that was just like a microcosm of something that a bigger point where it's just like if everyone in our community wanted to protect our community, like how much better off would we be? And it was like that type of like, that type of like pride in the individual household that like I realized I saw there with that 15-year-old girl cleaning up the sticks. And I want to instill that in my son so that he wants to take care of our household because he's part of it. And I think that whole concept is just fading away. This erosion of just like the pride in your community and your country at all is just dissipating. So it doesn't surprise me when people lash out at the system that they think is totally structured against them and just want to burn it all down.
May I just jump in, Donnie, on that and mention that the schools in teaching SEL are because they elevate emotion and they elevate social activity and social relationships above the things that schools used to be about, teaching things you need to know and be able to do. In doing that, they actually end up creating a hyper-individualism, which has in fact been has pervaded our culture and our society. So your sense is that a 14-year-old girl is going to tell her parents, "I'm not picking up sticks.
Right.
That's not me."
Yeah.
And we're used to seeing that. We're used to seeing people sort of run wild and say, "Well, you can't tell me what to do." And the answer to that is, wait a minute, maybe I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what the consequences of what you're planning are.
Right.
I can tell you what the consequences of the way you're living are, but no one will do that now. Right. And it is happening in the schools in this way. And if we change what the schools are teaching, we will make society a better place. And I would love to hear Chris's thoughts on that as a former teacher is.
I completely agree. The students that I had that had the worst discipline problems, when they talked to me, it was because they didn't have a stable family life. Many of them didn't have a father. And, after, lots of, conversations, they finally opened up and they would say that that's why they're acting out, because they didn't think anyone cared, anyone loved them. And I mean, obviously I was only with them a few hours a day, a couple days a week. I couldn't be that father figure, I don't think we should look to schools as the solution to this problem. I really think this is a macro societal problem. I think it's, our culture is so much coarser even today than it was when I was growing up 20 years ago. I think that, Sam, I think that your idea about the hyper individualization of things is also so true. I remember, growing up, it was so different because it seemed like, communities would come together for, 4th of July festival. Families would, kind of be running the thing. Nowadays, those have just been completely abandoned. And I feel like, communities are not run by parents and families anymore. Schools are not run by parents and families anymore. We look to the, state government and the federal government to just take care of these things. They can't, I really do think that at a certain point we need to say, enough is enough. And, parents and, communities need to say, we're going to solve this on our own. Where are the churches? Where are the charities, that should be, addressing these problems? Government can't address them. Government can't do anything.
So Chris and I were having.
Chris, I do agree with you, but my point is that first, do no harm. Right now, the schools are doing harm, and they are creating this horrible situation where the amount of depression and anxiety among children is through the roof. This isn't happening because they're homeschooled. It's happening because they're in government schools. So my point is we need to fix those in addition to all the other things that need to be done. But you're absolutely right that just changing the schools is not going to solve the problem in itself. However, it will reduce one of the major things that's causing the problem. And that's something that can be done through public policy and not just throw up our hands and say, oh, gee, this is too hard.
Oh, of course. And I completely agree with you that, schools have a role to play in this. And I can tell you just, from experience that, I taught at several public schools in the Chicago area and down in South Carolina. And these were, reputable schools in, middle-class neighborhoods. And the behavior of the students was just shocking to me. The disrespect, the disrespect to authority, the, disrespect to each other. I mean, I was in school in the late 1990s, and it was just such a different atmosphere. It's a different tenor, among the children and just among the schools, just in general. And I just feel like society has changed, fairly, rapidly in the past 20 years. And I'll keep going back to this, but I think it's a social and cultural, problem at heart. And I just think. I really do think that we've accepted this just coarsening of our culture, whether it's in music and movies and video games and the like. And I'm not blaming those things whatsoever. But the more that they just perpetuate that notion, that idea that, hey, it's okay to disrespect, and it's okay to not be a thriving participant in society, and the more that we okay that, wink, wink, nod, nod. I just feel like we're setting up this generation for, disaster here.
Yeah, and I think that this conversation and the conversation that I think is the most important is a conversation that can only exist in a long form way. Can you imagine trying to fit these concepts in a 3-minute soundbite on Fox News or CNN or something like that? It wouldn't happen. So that's why everyone just rushes to this. We need universal background checks or whatever. When the conversation that we're having is revealing or trying to shine a light on the idea that this is a much larger problem, a cultural rot problem that you can't just slap a Band-Aid on. And I feel like all of these proposals, these public policy proposals that are coming from the Beto O'Rourke's of the world, are just trying to slap Band-Aids on this.
Well, they're quick fixes because, human nature, you see something and you want to just solve it quickly.
Right.
But you cannot, that does not apply to this problem. This is a multi-dimensional problem that has been, persisting for years and years, and it is getting worse. The statistics clearly show that they are happening more frequently. So once again, I just go back to my fundamental question at the very beginning. Why is society producing 18-year-old, boys, they're not even really men yet, who want to go and just commit mass murder? Why is that happening?
Right. Yeah.
The words that have often been used in these discussions by, I think, more sensible people, frankly, who aren't looking for a quick fix, are narcissism and nihilism.
Right.
And I believe that we are through a variety of realms teaching young people narcissism and nihilism, that there's nothing more important in the world than you. And if there's nothing more important in the world than you, then nothing else means anything. And that's nihilism.
Right.
So how do we fix that? Well, it's going to take a lot of work.
No kidding. And like Chris said, I think it starts in the individual house with the individual family. But we're already reaching the halfway point, and I've got so much good stuff to talk about with this World Economic Forum. But everyone that's tuning in and listening to this, I'm very curious of your thoughts on this. If you think that conversations like this are more important than, weighing the pros and cons of, red flag laws or anything like that, leave a comment. Your comments underneath this video, especially on YouTube, do wonders for the algorithm. That is probably the most important thing that you can do to kind of show engagement in the video. And then that causes the algorithm to show other people in it in their suggested feed. So you could help out the channel just by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, anything like that. But I do want to shift to Davos. The Davos is going on right now. This is the World Economic Forum annual event that they have. Although I think they missed the last year or two because of COVID. So, whatever, it's still annual. Anyways, so this is, of course, the conference that's attended by so many of the world's elites, CEOs, world leaders, attend there. They fly their private jets, all the like. Of course, Al Gore and John Kerry are there because I don't think they ever missed a year. And, for our most constant listeners, you should know the World Economic Forum is the leading proponent of the Great Reset. So Chris and I and the rest of the socialism research team here at the Heartland Institute have been keeping an eye on the discussions going on at the various panels. And we have found some pretty interesting things. But before we get into any of these specifics, and again, specifics are great. I do want to ask Sam, because, you've been around a little bit longer than I have. You've seen the headline stories about Davos. And to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just give me your take on this, that the coverage, even from, the conservative side of the media, always seems to be very surface level. Like, it never really gets past the idea of the hypocrisy of them flying their jets and going there just so they could rub elbows and go skiing or something like that. And the rest of it, all the content that they talk about is kind of just ignored. Am I wrong on that? What do you think?
I don't think you're wrong at all. First of all, the right of center organizations don't tend to get their money from people who make $50,000 a year working in factories or in Walmart. And so they have a dog in the fight, and these multinational corporations, big companies that support free market organizations other than the Heartland Institute, those kinds of companies are very much in bed with the internationalists. And so it's cronyism, and that tail wags the dog of policy analysis, unfortunately.
Well, is there an element of the sense that these people are just like spewing hot air, and all the stuff that they talk about actually doesn't really amount to anything, so why pay attention to it? Because I feel like that was kind of the vibe that I had, kind of looking at some of these things several years ago.
Well, yes, there's the whole sense that, well, the international government, a world government isn't going to happen, so don't worry about it. And it didn't happen back then, but certainly a lot of things did happen that distorted the economy, distorted our lives, and took away jobs from ordinary Americans. Those are real things. And the fact that the World Economic Forum is committed to the globalization of the economy, that's fine. But they're committed to a forced globalization of the economy, which is not fine. The world economy should be what it is. Right. Now, here's the thing. When we talk about the economy, what are we really talking about? We're talking about people building things, doing things in service to others, and accepting payment for that.
Right, so voluntary interactions.
The economy is just people doing things for one another.
Right.
And building things. And when you make it that the economy is some set of numbers that can be manipulated from on high, normal people are going to be hurt.
Yeah.
That is inevitable. So when you have it on a national level, as we have long had in the United States since really the beginning of the progressive era at the beginning of the 20th century, when you have that, it messes things up. You have it on the world level, it's just going to be even worse.
Yeah, just a few years ago when Justin and I first started looking into the Great Reset, it was based on just these things that these types of people, these world elites, were saying. They kept saying the words Great Reset. They kept saying the word stakeholder capitalism. They all seem to be reading from the same playbook. So that's what got us kind of on the that's what turned our radar on to this whole idea of the Great Reset. So when we started looking into it and all the ESG stuff and everything, it almost seemed theoretical, because it was just them talking about how they can reimagine capitalism and make sure that it works for everybody, all the stakeholders and all of that. And then as we looked into it deeper, we realized it wasn't theoretical. It wasn't their plan for the future. It was their plan for now. And they've been setting up the infrastructure for all of this for the last years and decades. So now when I'm watching this stuff, not only am I like thinking that I'm getting a sense of what they're like talking about in the future, I'm getting a sense of what they're doing right now. So I take what they say at these conferences very seriously. Now there's a billion panels, and you have to find the ones that are interesting. Yesterday I went through 5 different panels before I found one where they're actually talking about something impactful. But the overall theme, I think, of this year's Davos was creating a global ESG system. And I have a couple of very interesting quotes for that. And just, so I'm not leaving anybody in the dark. ESG, if you're not fully aware, this is kind of the plan for basically having a Chinese social credit system that's judging how good or bad an actor is in the grand scheme of things, using a bunch of different metrics. It's that, but applied to businesses on a global level. So the E is environmental, S social, G governance. It's a bunch of different metrics that could take into account your carbon footprint and your water usage and your plastic usage and your up and downstream of your company. But it also has to do with do you have a diverse enough workforce? So, and do you have the proper ratio of Hispanics to Asians and your board of directors? All of this stuff, and then they run all the whatever, and they come up with they generate a score for a company, and then that score could be used to either penalize or award companies depending on how well their score is when they're playing this game of ESG. So it has been created. The infrastructure is there. But it's a little kind of pieced together as of now. And it seems like the major theme, and I'm going to let Chris talk about this for a little bit. It seems like the major theme of Davos this year is the construction of the planning out and the construction of a globalized ESG system. And Chris, I mean, I think the average listener to this podcast can realize just based off of that how troubling that might be. But feel free to tell us about some of the things that you've seen when you were doing some of the research on this.
Okay, so real quick, I just want to go back to what Sam was saying, because I think this is so important. Right after the American Revolution, Alexis de Tocqueville came and he studied, why America was so different from, the European countries, particularly France. And what he noticed was, wow, there's just people tinkering and trying things and innovating and experimenting. That's what happens when you do not have top-down control. That is the antithesis of the World Economic Forum's vision for, this global economy where everyone is assigned a certain place and a certain thing, and they should just do it and they should just be happy. I reject that in full, because you know what? They do not have the wherewithal. They do not have the knowledge to tinker with an economy that is, built on, billions of people, doing things that they should want to do, not be forced to do. So I just want to get that off the bat. But in terms of the ESG situation, so ESG has been around for a couple of years, and it seems like it's, starting to take shape and take form. And it really seems like you've got, these big financial institutions in particular, Bank of America, BlackRock, just the usual suspects, coupled with these multinational corporations. And it's almost as if they've just all, gotten together in a smoke-filled room and said, okay, how can we guarantee that we are going to be able to funnel money to the sectors that we want into the companies that we favor? And ESG, in a nutshell, to me, is just a giant scheme in which giant, financial institutions can pick and choose the winners, that they want. And of course, there's a governmental, aspect to this, because governments also are providing lots of this money, of course, through modern monetary theory and the like. And it is a top-down, control of the global economy, and I think it is doomed to fail, because it does not take into account experimentation and trial and error, and the things that have created the internet and space travel and all the awesome technologies that we have today. Many of them actually came about almost by sheer coincidence, Edison with the light bulb that just, go on and on and on. No one went to him and said, Mr. Edison, here is a filament. Here is how you will produce that filament. No, it took a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of him just, experimenting.
Yeah.
This is the opposite of that. And it's so frustrating.
Right, exactly. I mean, authoritarian types throughout history have always tried to centrally control the economy, whether, you're talking about communist China now or the Soviet Union back in the 70s and 80s or whatever. It's always been a top-down centralized control. And it's always failed because it's very hard to control the entire economy from a top-down perspective like that. But ESG offers that toolbox that allows it the possibility to actually effectively control everything from a top-down manner. If you're punishing companies, limiting their access to capital and loans and all of that because their ESG score isn't high enough, and you're the one that's setting the rules of what dictates a high enough ESG score, that's the control that these authoritarians throughout history have been dreaming of, since the dawn of time, seriously.
And they're subjective and they're subject to change at a moment's notice.
Well, exactly. They're not when they talk about the idea that the shareholder capitalism that we live under now is just profits at all costs, and that's all it is. When in reality, it's people voting with their dollars and judging a good or service based on how rewarding it is for them, beneficial it is for them. That's the real shareholder capitalism. And this stakeholder capitalism is replacing those objective metrics of how good a company is doing in terms of providing goods and services and replacing it with a subjective hodgepodge of metrics that just were made up and have no relation to each other. So how do you weigh one thing based on another? It's a disaster. But now they want to codify this at a global level. I've got a series of quotes from a whole bunch of very high up there people. This Laura Cha, chairman of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, talking about how we need to have a harmonized standard in terms of a global ESG system. Lynn Martin, president of the NYSE Group Incorporated, says that we need one common ESG framework and we're supportive of a harmonization of standards. So this is another thing that's telling when they're using the same phrases as that they're reading from the same playbook. So harmonized standards and a global baseline, one common framework, those type of things. That to me is very telling that this is the most important thing. This isn't just like, oh yeah, I came up with this, I'm going to say it in front of Davos. No. You've got some marching orders. We're on to you.
Another really scary part of it, because I've watched a bunch of sessions on the ESG stuff, is how complementary they are of China. And let's not forget that China's economy is going to be larger than the United States economy in the next few years. So I think a lot of these, WEF people are saying, we see China as like the next, big economic superpower, and therefore they're already pretty much on board with this. China's an authoritarian, system, by nature. So, they're already on board with this. They are, using ESG for, social control and their social credit system and all the like. So they're seeing, that rising trend, and they're saying, let's just apply this across the board. And the United States should, and the West in general should oppose this, because it's the antithesis of what made the West great, and it's the opposite of what made America the economic engine that has increased prosperity and lifted people from abject poverty more than any country in human history.
The people that speak at these conferences also have a very bad habit of being a little too candid when they think that just their global elite friends are listening and nobody like Chris and I are tuning in and taking notes. So when they're first talking about like ESG, it was almost like, this is just a more responsible way we can invest and, anything like that. And now, and we've highlighted that it's much more than just that. This is a top-down control type of a thing. But I've got a quote here. This is from Brian Moynihan, chairman and CEO of Bank of America, very bluntly talking about ESG, saying, quote, "The ones that deliver on the metrics will get more capital. The ones that don't will get less. And that'll keep pushing people in that direction." Do you need any other quotes other than that? If you play our game, you'll get loans and capital. If you don't, you're not going to get it. That's as blunt as you could possibly make it, folks. Like, I don't know if I need to read off any more quotes about this, but there's so much other good stuff here. One thing.
Johnny,
Oh, yes. Go ahead. Jump in while I get my mindset on the next topic here.
The World Economic Forum and ESG are the equivalent of, at this point, the equivalent of Obamacare. And they will have a similar result. The World Economic Forum fancies itself as basically the world government. And
Right.
they're going to do it by control of the means of production. And so the way they will do that is by saying you have to follow these particular rules in order to be allowed to have any money to invest in any good or service. So, but how is it like Obamacare? Because they recognize that if you institute this in Sweden or in India and the United States doesn't do it, then all the capital will flow to the United States because it will be sent to, in the United States, it's allowed to go to the places that are most economically efficient. And most economically efficient means it gives the most value to the most people. So what the World Economic Forum is saying is, in order to have a system in which we control everything, we have to control everything.
Exactly.
So it has to be universal. So that's what Obamacare did. They said, in order to have everybody be insured, we have to require everybody to buy insurance. So that's exactly how this system is going to work. What you said, though, is really important. Both of you said this, that it's destructive. This kind of management is destructive. And because it's very simple. A managed economy is a corrupt economy. And this will just simply give tons of power to people who, frankly, will do evil with it.
Right. Yeah, when we talked about the Great Reset and stuff, and me and Justin do this. I think Chris did this in a recent op-ed. You can't help but think of it like in the context of James Bond villains all conspiring over, in like some dark room or something like that. When in reality, they're all just sitting up on stage talking about this in front of cameras. So one of the panels that I tuned into, and Chris, this is what I was teasing earlier. One of the panels that I listened to yesterday and was taking notes on was called, what was it called? It was something about greenwashing or something like that, turning up the heat on greenwashing. So the whole problem that they were talking about in this was that there's so many companies out there that pledge to do some carbon negative initiatives or something like that, lower their carbon footprint, all of that. But then only a fraction of them actually come through and meet their goals. So you had Al Gore on stage with a couple of other people talking about how this is a serious problem. Only 37% even have goals, and of those, only 12% actually meet them, that type of stuff. And the conversation was basically like, how do you hold these people's feet to the fire and make sure that they're actually achieving their goals? So I was waiting for it. I'm waiting for their solution. And when it finally came, I was shocked. So Andy, I've got the first, I think you've got the first video queued up here. Let's go ahead and play it. This is Al Gore talking about how to keep these companies' feet to the fire.
As governments to make that structural change.
So yes. I have good news on this front. We are about to enter an age of radical transparency.
Radical transparency, folks.
I have been among those who have formed a new coalition called Climate Trace. TRACE stands for Tracking Real-Time Atmospheric Carbon Emissions. It's a coalition of artificial intelligence technology companies, NGOs, and universities using data from 300 existing satellites from multiple countries, ground, sea, and air-based sensors, and internet data streams to use machine learning to create algorithms for every single subsector of the economy. This October, we will publish the world's first inventory of exactly where the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from and in what amounts. Last year, we published the first global inventory on a nation state.
So go ahead and stop
level.
it there. He rambles
This year
a lot.
We will start with the.
So he has a thing in place already. The report's coming out in October. A network of 300 satellites and other ground sensors and all of that are positioned to pinpoint where carbon emissions are coming from, to basically be able to see what industries and what companies are actually releasing more carbon than they say they're releasing. If you don't have like a more like James Bond villain type plan than a giant network of spy satellites on every subsector of the economy, I don't know what other plan you can come up with.
James Bond villains know that they're villains. They know that they're doing evil. They know that they're selfish. They know that they just want power. These people think they're doing good. Yeah. They think they're perfectly good people, and that people who build things and people who serve other people hamburgers are evil,
right?
And they're fools, and they're very likely to go around shooting up crowds. When in fact these are the people who are destructive. And the great philosopher and writer C.S. Lewis made that point, that the people who do the most harm in the world are people who think they're doing good.
Chris, feel free to comment on this awesome plan. But while Chris is talking about it, Andy, pull up that next clip because I want to get right into more Al Gore stuff.
I'm shocked, scared, almost at a loss for words. But you know what? I think this is part of a greater threat where technology and governments just tracking our movements. I read that the CDC was tracking cell phone movement data to see who was and wasn't participating, in the lockdown at the beginning of COVID-19.
Oh, sure.
We've seen FBI, go in and use data to spy on Americans. I think that, I know I'm going off a little bit of a rant here, but I think, post 9/11, Patriot Act and all that, it is a slippery slope. And I think we are going well down that slippery slope. I'm a huge believer in privacy, and I don't want anyone tracking the amount of carbon I spew or, what websites I go to. I mean, what happened to privacy in the United States?
Oh, it's gone. It's gone, baby. We're in a new age here. All right. So this I just discovered this morning, like literally while I was putting the notes together for this show. And this was from the same panel. I listened to this part last night, but I didn't make the connection till this morning. So, Andy, let's just play a little bit of Al Gore. He's talking about somebody that strayed away from the pack, some banking executive ESG type guy that strayed away from the pack. So go ahead and play Al Gore.
Now, in Washington, D.C., you're too young to remember a writer named Michael Kinsley, who was a brilliant writer. And he once said that for politicians in D.C., the definition of a gaffe is when they accidentally tell the truth. Well, last week, an executive in charge of ESG and sustainable investing for one of the largest banks in the world committed that kind of gaffe. He said, who cares if Miami is under 6 meters of water later this century? Well, who cares? It's a relevant question. And he's not the only one who is committing hypocrisy, because if you
so go ahead and stop it there. Go ahead and stop it there. That's all the quote that I wanted. He goes on to talk about how this guy was rightfully suspended. So I didn't think about it then. I just, oh wow, some guy said he didn't care if Miami was going to be 4 feet underwater. That's crazy. And I moved on with my life. And then this morning when I was putting notes together, I remembered a story that I considered talking about on the podcast about a HSBC banker, Stuart Kirk, who's the one that he's talking about here, that didn't say that he didn't care whether or not Miami was going to be 4 feet underwater. No. During a presentation, he talked about how that financial markets need not worry about unsubstantiated, shrill, apocalyptic warnings that are always wrong. That's what he said. So for Al Gore to equate that to him not caring about things being 4 feet underwater or something like that, I thought was disingenuous. But and the fact that he was suspended, to me, that's like tantamount to like a mob hit. The guy strayed away from the narrative that we're all going to die from climate change. So the ESG and Davos crowd, metaphorically, gagged him, fitted him with a nice pair of concrete shoes, and tossed him in the bay. And the funniest thing about this story to me is that Al Gore prefaces the story with this idea of a politician making a gaffe by telling the truth. And then he says that this guy, this banker, made a gaffe by what? Telling the truth that we're not all going to die from climate change? So I thought like, oh my gosh, Al Gore made a gaffe about this guy making a gaffe. He just admitted that this HSBC banker was telling the truth, that we shouldn't all be scared that we're all going to die from climate change. My mind blew when I made that connection this morning.
I was thinking the exact same thing as he was saying that.
Yes. Isn't that staggering? That's insane.
And it's analogous to Joe Biden having said several times, really, that yes, high gas prices, that's what we want. Right. We want to drive people out of fossil fuels, and high prices will do that. What's fascinating about that is that prices tell the truth. Prices are truth.
Right.
Prices tell you how much people value something and how much of it there is. And when prices are high, people go into that field and create more of it, or they create alternatives that are cheaper. This is why the whole ESG and World Economic Forum, the Davos approach is destructive, because it takes the small minds of individuals, a relatively small group of people, and they put together their thoughts and say, okay, this is the most important thing. This is what we're going to do. So we're going to have less fossil fuel use. Well, that's going to have consequences. Whereas the market prices tell you what you need and how to get it.
Right. I've got one other clip here, Andy, if you have it handy. Chris, you were kind of talking about the idea of privacy and, the Al Gore spy satellite network. I can't even believe I'm saying that sentence in not a joking manner. Now, their primary focus is keeping a tab on industries and businesses specifically. I don't know if they're going to fine-tune one of those satellites specifically to look at your carbon footprint. But don't worry, the folks at Davos have a plan for the individual level too. So, Andy, if you got the...
Donnie, I wouldn't put anything past Al Gore, seeing as he did invent the internet. So.
That's true. That is very true. Andy, go ahead and play this awesome clip from this great mind at the World Economic Forum Davos agenda thing.
We're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint.
Oh,
what does that mean? That's... Where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
We don't have it operational yet. Again, it feels like he's talking about some super weapon or something like that. Like, again, from a James Bond villain perspective. And I love how he phrases it like, oh yeah, the individual can keep track of their own carbon footprint. BS. We know that you are going to be keeping track of our carbon footprint. It's not going to be a voluntary thing that we want to do just because we're curious about, how much carbon we're putting into the atmosphere. Wrong. You are doing that to us to keep track of how much carbon we're putting into the atmosphere. It's shocking stuff, but this is the type of stuff that they talk about just on a daily basis at the Davos agenda thing.
What is most frustrating to me personally is that the people who are implementing these dystopian plans are the ones who have carbon footprints that dwarf anything that I will ever do in my entire life, because they ride around in private jets all around the world, limousines, have mega mansions. John Kerry's got yachts. That guy spews in 1 year more carbon than I'm going to produce in my entire lifetime.
Oh yeah.
So
that's not hyperbole at all.
I would love to see the carbon footprint for the Al Gores and the John Kerrys and the Barack Obamas of the world, because their carbon footprints are going to be a heck of a lot higher than the average, Joe Sixpack American.
Yeah, well, I'm
Incidentally, they will do the measuring of your carbon footprint, Chris, and yours, Donald. They will do this measuring through your financial accounts.
Oh, sure.
They're already doing that. For things. So when you pay for things, it'll go on the record, and that's how they'll measure it. And what will happen there is that anything you buy or sell, you're going to have to justify it to a giant world government. It's a completely bizarre thought. But
Yeah.
what's further interesting about that is that's why they have to get rid of cash.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's.
Yes.
I mean, way to bring that grenade up in the last 30 seconds of the podcast.
Yeah.
Because we can spend the next 25 minutes talking about that.
And
But,
and a lot of Davos has been devoted to digital currency.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah. That is another.
They know what they're doing.
Yeah, of
Very
course
well
they do.
know what they're doing.
We just don't know what it's going to lead to because they're just demented, frankly.
Right. Yeah, and you have to stay
Exactly.
tuned to shows like ours that actually keeps tabs on what they're talking about at Davos 2022. But that's going to do it for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. If you write a review for us, subscribe, all of that, it'd be greatly appreciated. Like I said, for those audio-only listeners, that's like 98% of our viewership. If you want to join in the conversation, watch us live, put a face to the voice, that type of thing. By tuning in on Thursdays at noon, you can put your comments, you put your questions. Maybe we'll address your comments and answer your questions on the fly. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter, which is like 20% more bearable ever since the Elon Musk news. Feel free to follow us there at In the Tank Pod. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Chris, what do you have to pitch today?
StopInSocialism.com and Heartland.org.
Fantastic. And Sam Karnick, where can people go to see work that you are working on?
Thanks. Follow me on Twitter, Getter, and all those others at St. Karnick, at St. Karnick. And also, please check out HeartlandDailyNews.com as the screen is telling you there.
Perfect. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.